Hey, y'all. So my name is Taylor Jones, and I'm going to talk about how to build a bonfire. And it's about how we should hire and train Ember devs, or experience that I've had with that. So quick straw poll, real quick. Who here is in charge of hiring, or has a role of hiring anywhere at the company? Raise your hand. Wow. You guys have some cool supervisors let you do that. That's awesome. All right. So I don't want this talk to seem like it's like centered towards one person, right? So if you're an engineer, like you have something you can contribute to your culture. Whether that means that you don't directly hire somebody or not, I hope that you can find something in this talk that's relevant, whether you're hiring or whether you're just working with people that get hired, right? So we're at EmberConf, right? We all have bought into Ember in some way. Otherwise, I'd love to know why you're at this conference. But to be honest, Ember isn't exactly the first thing developers are running towards these days. And that's not a bad thing. So Tom was tweeting a couple of days ago, I was like, this is awesome, so I grabbed it. But it was basically kind of some thoughts on the stability over stagnation thing. And I think that while it's a smarter move in the long run to be more stable, it sometimes it doesn't always generate the most buzz, the most people that want to develop on the platform, and that's okay. For us who use Ember already, this is an awesome argument, right? We bought into that. But how do we convince other people to feel the same way that we do? So it made me think about a bonfire. I'll go over in a second, but I grew up in the Deep South. It's a strange, strange place. I still live in Florida, actually, so it's even great there, too. But I remember going to a lot of bonfires growing up, and they're basically central areas of heat, right? There's just a bunch of wood that you light on fire in somebody's random field, and so this is the South. But we strive to rally our teams around the bonfire of Ember in some way, right? Like, we're here at EmberConf. This is kind of like a giant bonfire in itself. We're all gathering around to talk about what we like and how we can make Ember better. But how we convince people outside of our fold to come join us, to come to this, or even in our teams, right? So this inevitably gets to hiring. Hiring is either really exciting or like the most annoying thing you've ever had to do, depending on kind of where you're at in your team, trying to, oh man, we need developers now, or like you're planning to. So for the companies I've worked for at least, and I haven't worked for a ton, but what I can say is that it can be a little bit difficult if you're really wanting Ember devs, right, to kind of find the right people. And I think the reason that we do this, right, is that we don't want to create jobs to keep up with any trend, right? We don't want to just say, okay, here's a new web framework out this week. Let's go hire people for it. And neither are all those trends healthy. And so we want to find a way to stick with Ember, but either way, we got to hire somebody, right? We got to get this stuff done. It's kind of what I wished I titled this talk after I submitted it, but I was like, God, I kind of like the bonfire thing. But anyways, I'm really concerned about how we hire well, right? And how we still make awesome stuff with Ember, because sometimes it feels like the two things are at odds with each other. So who am I to talk about this? Again, my name is Taylor Jones. I was born in Atlanta and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. I went to a small school called Auburn University, got a computer science degree. I currently live in Orlando, Florida. Shout out to the Orlando people here. I know there's like 5 of y'all, but hey, it's awesome. And I've worked with like Ruby, Python, Rust, and JavaScript mainly the past couple of years. I also have a bunch of animals at home. They're really cute, and I miss them a whole lot. And yeah, that's cool. So how did I get into Ember exactly? I think for me, it was about like the Ruby and Rails kind of involvement. A lot of the people that were involved in those communities early on have helped contribute to Ember. And so the point I want to make out of all this is my experience from learning Ember was initially writing APIs to be consumed by Ember data stuff. And so I'd always heard about this framework. Oh, Ember, it's really cool. Like, you should check it out. But I didn't really start writing Ember until I worked at my current company, IZEA. So we're going to talk about IZEA for a sec. It's going to seem like a little bit of an ad, but I promise there's a point to this. So right now at IZEA, we're taking this big old monolithic Rails view, and we're injecting Ember into parts of it. What this means is that we're kind of slow. We started with a small little speck, and we've grown out into this bigger thing. And we're still teaching a lot of our team Ember. I was kind of part of what I say, like second or third wave people that really started learning Ember, but we're still teaching our new hires and our veteran folks who never had to deal with it how to do Ember. So it's a relevant conversation for us. In the present, we've got this Rails monolith. We inject Ember. We started like a new Ember front-end project, but we're also injecting that right now, and it's really weird and awkward. And in the future, we're hoping that we're not going to have a big old Rails monolith. We're going to have a 100% Ember front-end supported by microservices, and we're going to shoot for no more injection with that kind of stuff. So the point of all this is we're pretty invested in Ember, in our present and in our future of our roadmap. And we don't see this slowing down anytime soon. So even the thought of, okay, why don't you just change frameworks for something more popular? That's not even a thought for us at this point. We're looking for developers who can really fit into this scheme. So IZEA is looking for engineers. Please talk to me if you're interested about this. But your company is probably also looking for engineers. And I looked at the job board earlier, and that seems to definitely be the case, which is great, right? But how can we do this? And so I think a lot of times a conversation I hear at work, or maybe you've been a part of this at work, right? It's like, well, we're having a hard time hiring engineers. Somebody says, well, why don't you hire more engineers? It's not really the right way, but it's tempting to think that's just the answer, just to get anybody in there and just kind of hope for the best. But there's really a lot more to that process, right? So I was at the Ember dinner last night, and somebody was talking about this book, and I was like really excited that we were talking about Mythical Man Month, because I think it's great. But the thesis of this book really is you can't throw people at a problem. It's a great read. I still really recommend it. It's a really meaningful book to me, but I'm reminded of that a lot. And the thoughts, or the ideas that I presented in it, right, is that you can hire more experienced developers, but ultimately those developers, still take time to train in your process, what you do, what you're trying to go after. Or you could hire less experienced developers, and you can teach and train them, but it takes longer to pay off. So all these things assume you have a vibrant talent pool outside your front door too, right? It's not really about balancing a salary cap either. You're not playing Moneyball. This isn't like a feel-good movie where you have a ragtag group of people and you change the world, right? But so for IZEA, we hire local to HQ. That's part of our story. But I think it's probably part of a lot of y'all's stories as well, is that you live in a city or you have certain offices and you want to bring really great Ember developers to them, but you're stuck convincing them not only to buy into your company, your process, whatever you're doing, but you're also convincing them like why they should move to X city, which I'm glad to talk about why I like where I live. But at the same time, like I don't want to spend that as part of my hiring process, right? It's hard and a little bit annoying. So I do want to talk about developing a culture that lasts. I'm not going to talk about the Mingos as much as I love them, but yeah. First takeaway is that you should really start small when developing kind of culture or really developing a culture of teaching and learning. And so for me, and from what I've seen, developing a culture of teaching Ember in small steps has really worked for us. I kind of talk about this in a way of taking small bets. So what that means is that for us, we kind of when we teach new developers projects, we tend to stick them on smaller things. So say like even as simple as like, hey, can you build this component of this functionality that displays this, and go from there. To somebody who's never seen Ember before, that's a crazy life-changing task that just seems like gargantuan, right? And it's not because they're not smart or something like that. It's because Ember, it can be intimidating. Everything has a learning curve to it. So for us, we wanted to have an environment where we never were telling people just read our docs or just read our standards and figure it out yourself. We want to have like this ability to have a little bit of a one-on-one or a pairing or something like that. In hindsight, for us, I think having a professional company come in and say like, hey, this is really where we found success, and helping kind of share those secrets or that knowledge base, right, would have been super helpful for us, because we found that even when we're taking the smaller bets, when we were taking the big stuff, like learning how to deploy an Ember app that randomly injects itself into a Rails monolith, it seemed it was a little bit difficult, to say the least. And so, but we ended up starting ourselves a small fire with this. We've gotten ourselves somewhere. We had a group of developers that learned and acquired Ember and were really good at it. And so we wanted to expand upon that. So how do we scale that? Seems like a common question. We always talk about, oh man, we're going to scale this process or this app or whatever, and so we become desensitized to the idea of scaling, right? But how do we move on to helping our whole team become skilled at Ember? And I think the thing that I'm most concerned about is the skilled aspect, because you can teach your team how to do Ember and how to be knowledgeable at these thought processes and all that, but the be skilled is a whole nother thing. So I want to talk about how we can teach well, or help kind of fan the flames that we started, those small fires, right? The way that they grow bigger is they have to have oxygen flow to them. And so I want to talk about two types of JS developers in really, really generic terms. But the first being newbies, folks who are new to JavaScript or JavaScript frameworks, or veterans, people who are somewhat familiar with JavaScript. For newbies, they have Ember is likely going to be the first thing that they learn, right? And Ember has a lot of opinions and structure to it. So those ideas aren't as controversial to them at first. But you have to also teach the fundamentals of JavaScript alongside those Ember concepts, so it can kind of feel like you turned on an information fire hose and you have just doused this person's mind and just all these things, right? And so it takes them a while to process and let that sink in. And so that learning curve can seem kind of high because you're learning programming, you're learning JavaScript, and you're learning a front-end framework that has a great legacy and has a lot of API to it. So for veterans, they kind of know their JavaScript, right? But the opinions and the thought processes and the structure of Ember can sometimes be off-putting. I've seen this in a lot of ways when you come from a background where like people have problems with like generators, so saying, Ember, G, whatever. And then that's not a bad thing, but you have to kind of walk through those concerns in a lot of ways to really effectively teach, but also kind of get a buy-in from them on JavaScript. So ultimately, it comes down to this tension between the way that we view things. And we tend to view things in terms of either foundations or features. And what I mean by foundations is I mean the core ideas that make up Ember, or the tool set and the opinions behind them. To really dig into find like a true like foundation of Ember, right? You have to look all the way back to the core values, and then you have to look at the technical things that are really like no matter what, Ember is not Ember without this thing or this philosophy or this attitude towards development. So for newbies, the idea of foundations are pretty easy to accept because, again, they don't have much to compare to. And so they're going to have that buy-in pretty early on. But I do want to encourage to kind of limit that exposure, right? Don't necessarily just go talk about how great you think Ember is and how like the philosophies are just bulletproof in your opinion, because while they are great and they're good, to a new developer, they don't really care. They're just confused, and they're wanting to just like do stuff, right? They don't want to really hear about all the exterior stuff yet, because what really cements that is actually doing work. And so when you realize, like, hey, remember how you went and made this component, and it was, routed this way, and all this stuff, you start connecting those basic things as time goes on. For veterans, they're less impressionable, and they're more likely to be opinionated. Sometimes you have people that really stick their nose up and they say, I don't understand front-end frameworks, and I can't believe we do this. This is so ridiculous. Back in my day, the whole thing, right? But other people are just like, I'm genuinely wanting to know. I'm confused. I feel like I'm fine with this. I just want to buy into this. And so you have to kind of give them a chance to buy in. So with features, there are things that make Ember that stick out Ember for the moment, right? We've explored some exciting stuff that's currently hit Ember or is about to hit Ember, and this is what makes this conference so exciting as we see the past, present, and future. We tend to focus sometimes too much on features. These things make frameworks in Ember buzzworthy in the moment, but at the end of the day, like they're kind of somewhat temporary, right? For newbies, they can confuse these features as foundations. And that's okay, because likely you can trace a foundation to the feature. Trace a feature to the foundation, right? But for veterans, they need to have features to help cement them why the foundations matter. Because what I hear is like, oh, well, this is all talk, right? You can give the person the business pitch. You can say, hey, this is why we use this. It's so great, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, like, it's got to kind of see, like, all right, where is the proof here? So what are some practical ways we can leverage these things to teach Ember? So I want to kind of go through what I would consider some scenarios of past lives that I've dealt with teaching people Ember or seeing people being taught Ember. I hear people, we have a lot of people that say, I'm used to React, right? And this is not going to be a roast of other frameworks, by the way. But anyways, so you want to kind of emphasize the common threads that things have. For React, I see that with components in the React router. I think that the attitudes towards those things are different between the two frameworks. But you can kind of say like, hey, you know how you love Redux? Well, Ember's got its own version of structure, and you can do Redux with Ember, but there's a similarity that you can start to capitalize on there. There's also the idea of no more Webpack. It depends on how in love with Webpack they are. You can kind of go down the road of teaching broccoli and go through that stuff, but the thing that they have say concerned about is like, hey, you can just run Ember.js and this thing's up and running, and you don't really have to do much wrangling, right? The gripe I do have that's really hard, and it's just kind of, it's like eating your vegetables, right? It's like you just have to kind of straight up teach Ember data. You just have to be like, hey, this is how modeling works in Ember. Love it or hate it. It's not necessarily probably what you're used to, or maybe you've done it in a different manner. There's the I'm used to Angular folks, right? And you can say, hey, like Ember is more consistent, and that's the thing that we like to, high five ourselves and say, yeah, we didn't change it 5 times, right? But there's something to appreciate about that, right? There's something to say like, hey, listen, when you learn Ember or you learn some aspect of Ember, you're buying into that and you kind of are able to figure it out. So like if you walk away and come back 5 years later, like things are going to have changed, obviously. But at the same time, those core concepts, those foundations, those things that you kind of learned early on, they're still there. They're not really drastically just being depreciated and you feel like you're kind of left for dead. So the component ideas might come off as foreign to some people, so that's kind of hard. I'm not an Angular expert, but what I can tell is that there's a little bit of a difference with that. There are shared ideas around the controllers, routers, and services. Again, like mileage can kind of vary with that, but yeah. And so here's the one that I thought was really, really interesting to talk about, and that was that, I used Ember 5 years ago, but I recently came back to it. And we've kind of found that now, right? Like Ember is getting to that point where like you have people that are like, hey, I worked at my Ember in my job like 2 jobs ago. And I did a lot of work with it, but I moved on to React or did something else, and now I'm back here at this Ember shop. Like, what's up? So not a lot of folks think about the Ember problem or I used to do Ember thing. The thing that I've found is that a lot of these people tend to write more brute force approaches to things. Meaning that they tend to just kind of do it the old way, and they're like, well, I don't really want to learn the new stuff, right? Because they want to get up and running off their old knowledge. I think it's really important to kind of just stop that, right? And kind of make sure that they really kind of have a refresher. Because it can be really, really tempting to fall in your old ways, because your old ways are right in this case, right? Like if you say like, oh, this is how I used to develop jQuery or something like that, like it's addressable, right? You can say that that's not how Ember is in any way. But you can say, well, this worked 3 years ago, and sure, it could work, but you might be missing out on a lot of the goodness that we've added recently. So the point I want to emphasize is the context of developers' past determines how they understand the future. And we have to leverage this effectively with hiring. This does affect the way that we hire new folks, but how exactly does it do that? And it's because I believe in like the concept of hiring people versus hiring skill sets. And we'll kind of see these ideas revisit themselves as we get through the conference this week, but I believe that hiring people is more based on how people work with each other rather than their skill set, right? What they can contribute to your culture, so to speak. And not like what can you bring us, but okay, would adding this person help challenge viewpoints, but also help encourage people to work together more and think about things in a different way? That's ideal world, right? Personalities clash. People are different, but that's a good thing. So we want to look for people who teach, but are also willing to be students. And that sounds like a generic job requirement, and I kind of hate the wording of that. But what I will say is that it's truly for real, right? Like you want people who are humble to admit they're wrong, but also willing to kind of sit and like learn, because I learn new stuff every day. And I feel like I've been programming for a second, but I don't want that to ever change, because that's what I like about it. So there's also the idea of hiring skill sets, right? Like, and this is, it may seem like a bad thing, like, oh, Taylor, we never hire for skill set, like, only squares do that. But like the reality is, we all have to find ourselves in this point. We kind of say, like, I need this kind of developer now. and I will pay a lot of money for that. And you may be able to get that, right? And we're more concerned about how open they are and working on things in that skill set, right? We still want to have our checks of like, is this person legit? Or are they really going to be a team player? Are they really going to actually engage our team? Or are they just going to be like, well, I'm the guy that's getting paid a lot of money for this, so you guys better listen up. I believe that we've got to champion people who communicate, who emphasize, and deliver consistently. If you're looking for 3 values to put for your team and to kind of look for in hiring, like, always go back to these, because it's not like saying like the perfect person or the most consistent people I've ever worked with are like this, but it's pretty much a winning formula no matter what position you're in, whether you're hiring for skill or for culture. And this goes down to like hiring diversity. Like, I can come and give a talk about that, but like it should be really self-understood that if you hire people from different backgrounds or from different perspectives, like you're gonna have that clash. You're gonna have people saying like, I don't really get along with this person, or I don't really understand this person. That's okay, because you're able to develop apps that actually are a result of that, right? The communities that we're a part of, ultimately, the products that come out of them are ultimately a result of how diverse we are and how many different perspectives we have on those things. So that's the plug for that. Please do that. Please, please, please. Isaiah does not have this all figured out. I don't have this figured out. I got a speaking slot here, which I was really, really stoked about, but I was also like, oh wait, I have to do this now. This is terrifying in some sort of way. But what we can do, right, as somebody who's coming and speaking about this, and as anybody else who's here at this conference this weekend, we can figure this out together in our companies, in conversations. Like, it requires us all to buy into this, right? Like, Ember ultimately will survive off people consistently coming back and believing in what it's about. So I'm going to leave with some last thoughts that might seem a little bit disorganized, but they're kind of the summations of what I've been going after this whole talk. The structure and opinions that Ember presents can be really hard for people to adjust to. And we have to always remember this, because it's the idea of, right, having an opinion, having something to kind of stand upon. You can kind of try to cater to everybody and say, well, if you want to build your app cross-functional and serverless, you can, and that's great, right? But there's a very specific use case and opinions about Ember, and while we need to value those things and stick up for those things, we also be sympathetic to conversations with people who really just don't get that, or they're really mad about it, I guess. I've just seen conversations where people have really been sour about opinions for some reason. And it's hard to rally people around a new framework when they're so strongly bought into something else, right? It almost feels like you're trying to convince somebody to believe something different, right? And I see this a lot honestly with React folks, and it's not a diss. It's just I think there's a strong brand loyalty and buy-in from that, right? There's people say, well, React does this. That's great, man. I appreciate that, but can we just program this? This is the job, You never want to come down to this is your job to do this, man. Come on. But you find those things. But I think being sympathetic to that and realizing that you have to get that buy-in from them, you have to slowly convince. You have to kind of slowly change their mind, right? You're not going to just come in with the argument Ember is better. You've been missing this your whole life, you dummy. It's never going to be a conversation that you have. Or please don't have that conversation, actually. And I will say that developers will often resort back to old ways of solving problems if they're not informed of a new way. What this means, you'll see this with just anything, right? If you don't clarify something for people when you're teaching stuff or they're learning something and then you're kind of moving really fast, right? You can kind of find yourself putting it in the same situation where you were before, where you felt like there was maybe sloppy code or inconsistent code in your code base, and you're like, it'd be really great if we could eliminate all this messy JavaScript that's written in 10 different styles, and looks like everybody it's not consistent, right? With Ember, when you start, or as you invest more and more, as you bring more and more people on, right, you want to keep that consistency, because there's a real danger with the thought of legacy Ember applications that are not organized, right? And we can use the things to explore to help break these cycles in your team, right? Of falling back on your own ways. As you kind of grow more and more and more, you want to consistently check yourself. Are people feeling available to learn, right? Are people willing to learn? Are they willing to buy into what we're doing? Or are they falling back into old ways because they don't really feel like something's clarified? And so for me, the biggest thing and biggest point of success I've found is having a style guide. It doesn't, and don't focus on like well, you must have 3 tab spaces junk. Like, forget about that, but more so about, all right, if I want to solve a problem this way, right, unique to the way that we're doing Ember, how can I do this? You want to have something that people can reference to and not necessarily silent information. You want to have it in an open way that people can learn, people can reference the docs, right? But I never want to just go say like, oh yeah, just go read Ember docs, they're great, but you don't need my help or whatever. Like, you want to always be available for that, but you also want to have something that is kind of a programmatic, like voicemail, right? Like when you can't be reached to answer a question. And the thing I think I have to realize every day, and the thing that I think we have to all realize as a community is that if you're really bought into Ember, not everybody's going to like it as much as you do. And that's okay, because we get to celebrate it in weeks like this. We get to really code it a lot, and it's really fun. But what you want to have is you want to have that buy-in, right, that says, hey, like, I may not love this, but I know how to use it, I'm proficient at it, and I agree with a lot of the ideas that it does. Teach well, lead well, and love each other well. I think those things will all kind of help things fall in line from a kind of more like it's kind of like a bumper sticker type thing, right? But ultimately, I think all the things that I say are rooted in that. So thank you guys very much. I appreciate it, and that's my talk. So if you want to hang out and talk later, I'll be around.